Okay, so our topic of interest is data flow analysis. And before we begin, I believe all of you had a fun 1 week, even if it was tiring. You must have been exposed to optimizations, and data flow analysis is one way of doing these optimizations systematically, collecting information for doing these optimizations systematically. So I'm going to begin with a preview of optimizations, things that you would have seen before. Uh, and so this is the outline of my overall lecture. We will begin with examples of classical optimizations performed by compilers. Then we'll dwell a bit on what is program analysis. What do we mean by program analysis? And then we will look at this technique of program analysis called data analysis. In particular, we want to learn the principles of data flow analysis through two analyses called live variables analysis and available expressions analysis. And then we will conclude. So this is the overall outline of what we are going to do today. So talking about classical optimizations, here is that celebrated example from Aho, Lam, Sethi, Ullman book that demonstrates the usefulness of optimizations. So what we see here in the green box is a quick sort function. And we are interested in looking at the optimization of the code in the yellow box. Let's not worry too much about what's there in the yellow box. We're not interested in what does this program do. We are interested in what we can do with this program in order to improve this program. So let's focus on this yellow code, and it is represented like this in an intermediate code. So we're talking about a high-level program in C, and then we're talking about a compiler representing it in an intermediate form called 3-address code, where we have at most 3 variables involved in any assignments. And you can see that we have this I is equal to m minus 1, which corresponds to this assignment I is equal to m minus 1. And we have then j is equal to n, which corresponds to this assignment j is equal to n. Let me make the circle a little smaller. Yes. So we're talking about this assignment j is equal to n, which gets reflected as j is equal to n. And then we have this assignment, v is equal to a of n, which gets translated into a sequence of assignments here. We first identify the nth address of the nth element by multiplying it by 4, because this is an integer array. Then we access that location, store in a temporary variable, and we store that into V. So the idea behind 3-address code is to divide larger expressions into smaller expressions, into smaller computations, so that there is at most one operator in any statement. So this statement requires multiplication. This particular statement requires multiplication by the width and then dereferencing the array. And therefore, it is broken up into 2 different statements. So this is how this overall program looks like. I'm not going to go to explain each statements. The slides will be left with you, and then you can go over the slides and map the program to these intermediate code statements. Before I begin, I would like to urge you to ask me questions, pause me at any point of time. Although we are delayed by 15 minutes, I don't want you to be worried too much about it. We will be able to adjust things. I will be able to do some dynamic adjustments while the lecture goes on. But I do want to reach out to you rather than simply pour out my slides onto your screens. And therefore, it is very, very important that you should ask me questions without any hesitation at any point. Please unmute yourself. I may not be able to monitor the chat. So what you have to do is you have to unmute yourself and speak up, or someone else will have to monitor the chat and will have to read out the questions for me. Okay, so with that protocol on, let's move on. As you can see, there are certain colors on the screen. And if you observe it very closely, you will see that these colors essentially represent the same expression. So this color, light blue, essentially shows expression 4 star I being computed in temporary T2. Here also T2 is equal to 4 star I. Here also T2 is equal to 4 star I. And here also T2 is equal to 4 star I. Here also T2 is equal to 4 star I. So color blue represents T2 is equal to 4 star I, whereas color green represents 4 star N, color yellow represents 4 star J. Then we have this pink color, which represents dereference of the array with T4 everywhere. We have T5 is equal to T4. So this is how, then the reason why we have done so is that we have multiple, we're just trying to show that multiple computations of an expressions are stored in the same temporary. There are multiple expressions with multiple occurrences of the same expression, and we are storing them in the same temporary. This is different from what Aho Sethi-Ullmann's book says. This is a different philosophy that I'm using. It makes it easier for us to identify an expression simply by its temporary variable. Okay, so we have very simple control flow, and yet it's difficult to understand. So what we do is we create what is called control flow graph, which is essentially consists of basic blocks. Each node in the control flow graph is a basic block, and there is no transfer into or out of basic block except at the first and the last statement. So it's a maximal sequence of statements in which there is strictly linear control flow. Control transfer into the block is only at the first statement, and control transfer out of the block is only at the last statement. In the simplest case, the basic block could be a single statement as well. So we create basic blocks like this, and then we convert it into control flow graph, and we say here this is one particular basic block. So we have this as one basic block. So this is one basic block B1. On the other hand, this is the other basic block B2. So we identify basic blocks like this. And the thing to note here is that if we look at the original program had a while loop, and within that it had two do while loops. So we want to see how it shows up in our control flow graph. So the outside while loop is shown by this particular loop, and then there are two inside do while loops which are shown by this. Okay, now the interesting thing that we want to talk about this program is what is called common subexpression elimination. So we're talking about local common subexpression elimination. I believe Professor Krishna Nandiwada has already touched upon local common subexpression elimination. So when we want to do local common subexpression elimination, what we are essentially saying is that whenever we have, I don't know how to get rid of this box, I've forgotten. Control C. Okay, we'll have to live with it. Maybe I won't draw the box in future. Okay, so the important point is that here we have the expression 4 star I, and here also we have the expression 4 star I, and between these two occurrences of 4 star I, the value of I is not changing, and therefore the second occurrence is redundant. Similarly, here also we have an occurrence of 4 star J, and this 4 star J is the value of j is not changing, and therefore this occurrence of 4 star j is redundant. Similarly, here the value of n is not changing, so this occurrence of 4 star n is redundant. So we can eliminate these occurrences. We can eliminate these computations, and this is where having the same temporary variable is useful, because we have already used temporary T2 for this expression for every occurrence. So we can simply delete an expression without touching upon, without trying to adjust the temporary names for subsequent uses of the value of 4 star I. So this is local common subexpression elimination. The next optimization is global common subexpression elimination, where we have this expression 4 star I computed here, and we have expression 4 star I computed here as well. We have 4 star j computed here and 4 star j computed here. And the question that we want to ask is, can we get rid of these 4 star j computations and 4 star I computations? So I would like to pause here for a minute. I'm trying to get you involved. So would someone like to tell me specifically about this 4 star I? There is an occurrence of 4 star I in B2, and there is an occurrence of 4 star I in B5. Do you feel that the occurrence in B5 is redundant? Can anyone express an opinion? Someone please say something.
Yes, I feel it will be redundant since I is not changing its value through the course of
so you're right, but we also have to be careful. We have to be careful in the sense that we have to worry about every path reaching from I to every path reaching from this occurrence to this occurrence. And if you observe carefully, there is this one path which goes back, and then here I is changing. Isn't it true? Agreed that along this path I is not changing, but there is a path along the loop along which I is changing. So would you like to change your answer?
But still, that like the B2 statement is executed first, and then the B5 statement would be executed. So if there'll be a change in I, it will be reflected in B2. And
yes. The point is that 4 star I is recomputed after, even if I is modified. Okay. So the interesting thing is, when we talk about I, the value of I not changing between these two occurrences, formally or technically, to be very precise, we are saying on every path between the last occurrence of this 4 star I and the first occurrence of this 4 star I, the value of I does not change. Okay. More specifically, if we were to write down a possible path, so B2 may be executed multiple times. So if you talk about this I, this definition of I, and this use of I, indeed I is changing in between. So we cannot be talking about this occurrence of 4 star I and this occurrence of 4 star I. We must talk about the last occurrence of 4 star I. There are multiple occurrences. So when we have computation in a loop, we're talking about multiple occurrences. And when we relate when we talk about data flow, we're talking about flow of the data from this occurrence, from this computation of 4 star I to this computation of 4 star I. And clearly, if it is the last occurrence, then the value of I is not changing. And so indeed, 4 star I is redundant. Now the question is, how do we reason about this formally? How do we reason about this algorithmically without getting into intuitive reasoning? How do we capture this concept that we want to talk about last occurrence? There could be multiple occurrences of the same statement in any execution path, and how, because of the presence of loop, and how do we talk about the last occurrence of the previous computation and the first occurrence of the next computation? I mean, B5 itself could have a loop around it, and there could be multiple occurrences of B5. So we talk about this. For this, we talk about the last occurrence. We talk about the first occurrence for this. So the question is, how do we do it systematically? Can we write mathematics of doing this? And that's the topic of today's lecture. Okay. So what we will do is, for now, we will proceed. So we're talking about these two last and the first occurrences. So for now, we will proceed. For now, we will assume that there is a way of doing it. And therefore, we observe that we can get rid of this. T2 is equal to 4 star I. We can get rid of this. T4 is equal to 4 star J. We can get rid of this, as well as we can get rid of this. So eventually, our optimized program looks like this. So we have got rid of many further computations. So this is global common subexpression elimination. And by the end of this lecture, you will know how this is done systematically. But there are further optimizations which are enabled by data flow analysis. And let's spend a bit of time on them. We're talking about copy propagation, strength reduction, elimination of induction variables, and dead code elimination. So let's look at the program still more carefully. Okay, observe here that whenever the value of T2 changes, when we multiply 4 to I is incremented by 1. What it essentially means is that the value of T2 is changing by 4 every time. Okay, so this slide is about dead code elimination. So strength reduction will come a little later. Let's focus on dead code elimination. So we have X is equal to T3 and we have AT4 is equal to X. So X is equal to T3. So which means that X is a copy of T3. Okay. And neither T3 nor X are being modified here. So we can replace this X by T3. So we can perform what is called copy propagation. So we replace this X by T3 here. And the advantage of doing that is, on its own, it doesn't optimize the program in any way. It doesn't get rid of any computation, but it enables another optimization called dead code elimination. What does it mean? What it means is, after we have replaced X by T3, we find that there is no use of the value of X in the program. Similarly, here we have replaced this X by T3. There is no use of the value of X, which means that this assignment X is equal to T3 and this assignment X is equal to T3. These two assignments are redundant. They are storing values in variables which have no further uses. We have eliminated their uses by replacing their right-hand side in the place where those variables were used. And therefore, these particular assignments are dead. They are called dead code. So we want to eliminate dead code from the program, and we can, because there is no point in storing these values. So we perform dead code elimination and we are able to optimize the program still further. Okay. Yeah.
I have one question here. So we have removed the X definition now. So we also have to ensure this, right? That X is not being used in another some basic block.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is a precondition. And that requires performing something called live variables analysis, which we shall see today in the data flow in our lecture. So we have to ascertain that, I mean, here I just reasoned about it. We have to ascertain that going further, there is no use of X below this. And so that is, so if there is a use of X, X is called live. If there is no use of X, X is called dead. Okay, so we will have to do that. I am simply waving my hands and showing you intuitively that this thing is possible. And then I will show you how this thing is done systematically. But you are right. You have to ensure that there is no use of X any further. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, very good. Yeah, anyone else has any other question about this? Okay, so let's proceed further. So let's talk about strength reduction and induction variable elimination. This is another optimization. The idea is to, induction variable is a variable that controls a loop, that is used for loop, and we can eliminate those variables. And we talk about strength reduction. By strength reduction, we mean that we would like to replace high strength computation such as multiplication by addition, because there are fewer multipliers on a processor than there are adders. And in the earlier days, multiplication would take more cycles than addition. Nowadays, of course, most processors have same number of cycles for most instructions. But still, since multipliers are fewer, the circuitry is expensive, takes more space on the silicon, and therefore multipliers, we have fewer multipliers and many more adders. Implementing addition in silicon is much easier. Okay, so the idea is to replace this particularly in the loops, because we are talking about repeated benefit. If we replace one multiplication by an addition, and if we save 2 cycles and the loop is to be executed 1,000,000 times, we've saved 2,000,000 cycles. So that's the idea of this optimization. So the thing to observe here is that this 4 star J, when we compute 4 star I here and when we compute 4 star J here, the value of T2 increases by 4 every time the value of I increases by 1. Similarly here, the value of T4, because T4 is 4 star J and J is decremented by 1, every time the value of T4 decrements by 4, here the value of T2 increments by 4, which means that I and J are moving in a logged fashion. Okay, so what we can do is this comparison between I and J can be replaced by comparison between T2 and T4. The Boolean condition will still remain the same because the values are moving in a locked fashion. And therefore, we can replace this condition by T2 and T4. The other thing that we can do is if we initialize the values of T2 and T4, then within the loop, here we can simply increment the value of T2 by 4, and here we can decrement the value of T4 by 4. So our optimized program looks like this. We have initialized T2 is equal to 4 star I, T4 is equal to 4 star J, and now we have T2 is equal to T2 plus 4. We have replaced a multiplication by an addition within a doubly nested loop. Similarly, we have replaced a multiplication by a subtraction, which is addition with a negative number, in a doubly nested loop. And because we have replaced I and J by T2 and T4, there is no use of I and J, and we have got rid of I and J from within the loop. There is no need to use these values there. So this is strength reduction and induction variable elimination. So these are the optimizations that every compiler does. And the final intermediate code after this looks like this. You can see there are several slots that are blank. There are several slots that are vacant. So this is how a program can be optimized. These are all intra-procedural optimizations. And we want to see the basis of this. So what do we observe? We observe that optimizations are transformations based on some information. We need systematic analysis to derive the information. We have looked at data flow optimizations. Many control flow optimizations can also be performed where we can simplify the control flow. In particular, the loop optimizations that Professor Krishna Nandivada considered are examples of control flow optimizations where you transform the loop in some way. Okay, so here are the categories of optimizing transformations and analyses. So we can talk about code motion, redundancy elimination, control flow optimizations. These are machine independent optimizations. We can perform control flow analysis, data flow analysis, and control flow analysis. There are several loop transformations. Some of them are machine dependent, some of them are machine independent, but they require performing what is called dependence analysis, data dependence analysis, and control dependence analysis. Then there are instruction scheduling, register allocation, people optimization, which are machine dependent optimizations, which have several independent techniques. I believe Professor Govindarajan has covered some of them in sufficient details. And eventually we have parallelization and vectorization, which are machine dependent, where again we use dependence analysis, or we use what is called polyhedral compilation, which is what Professor Sanjay Rajapade is going to cover, I believe, tomorrow sometime. So this is the category of optimizing transformations. Our focus is on data flow analysis. That's what we want to see. Okay, so we talked about live variables analysis. We talked about dead code elimination. Let's look at live variables analysis informally, and then we will formalize our intuition. So here is a simple program. So we want to do live variables analysis. What does this program do? So it has some pointers. We say w equal to x, and while x dot data is equal to something, we say x is equal to x dot rptr. This is a Java style notation. Maybe I should have put arrows here. Please keep in mind this is a Java style notation, not C++ or C style notation. So x is equal to in C style notation, this will be a problem. So we have x is a structure, and we can't assign x like this. Okay, so we move this pointer x like this, and we have y is equal to x dot lptr. But let's, again, as I said, let's not worry too much about what does this program do. We are interested in seeing which of these variables can be eliminated, which of these assignments can be eliminated. So we want to perform live variables analysis. So we begin by observing that at the end of the program, no variable is used beyond this program point. So we have w, x, y, and z. These are the variables. None of them is live. They are dead. So we show them with red color. And what we have to do is we have to step over this particular assignment statement. Given the set of variables that are live here, we examine what's happening within this statement, and we then determine which variables should be live above this statement. So which variables will become live? The variables that are read within the program will become live. And we are talking about stack variables, so we won't talk about the field of a stack variable. We'll only talk about z here. And in order to access the field sum of z, we need to read the value of z on the stack, and therefore z becomes live. So we say here that w, x, and y are still dead, but z becomes live because current value of z is used beyond this program point. A simple litmus test of determining whether a variable is live at a program point or not is to imagine this. Supposing we were to put a garbage value in the variable, in the location of the variable, will the rest of the program be affected? Is there a chance that the rest of the program may be affected, assuming every path is equally likely to be executed? If that happens, then the variable is live. On the other hand, if we can assure that no matter which execution path is taken by the program, if we put a garbage value in the variable, then nothing is going to change, then that variable is not live. And we will apply this as we go above. So can someone tell me what are the variables that are live before this particular statement? Having known the variables that are live after this statement, which are the variables that are live before this statement? Someone please say something.
X and Y.
X and Y. What about Z?
It's being assigned, sir. So like you could, doesn't matter because you're assigning it anyway.
So supposing I put a null value in Z here or a garbage in Z here, Will that work?
When you assign it, it's obviously a null value, right?
No, I
I
think
mean,
it won't work because you need that object, right?
Yes.
That
it's
object.
You need to access that object, right? So assignment is not to Z, assignment is to Z dot sum, right? So what this example brings out is everything that appears on Z on the left hand side of an assignment is not necessarily modified. We can read on the left hand side of the assignment as well, and we need to read Z. We need to read Z and then use that value of Z to add the offset of sum to reach that location represented by sum. And therefore, Z is actually live. And what we have here is X, Y, Z, all of them are live. Okay. Now, what is live before this statement? Can someone say? Okay, let me go fast. So this is X, Y, Z, and remember the value of Y has changed. We are not saying whether the value of variable remains same or whether the value of variable changes. We are simply saying whatever is the value of the variable, is it likely to be used further? So clearly the current value of Y is used because Y is read here, in spite of the fact that Y is defined here. Now, can someone tell me what is the liveness information before this statement? Z is equal to new class of Z. Which variables are live?
X and Y.
X and Y. In particular, Z is not live because we are redefining Z. We might put anything in Z. We might put any address in Z. It doesn't matter. Right? And so Y becomes dead. Similarly, when we go above this, we observe that Y is dead here. Because Y is reassigned, only X is live. Now, in order to perform analysis of this statement, which is in a loop, what we do is we assume that all variables are dead and all variables are dead, and we will justify why this is the assumption and why this is a valid assumption. So we assume that all variables are dead, and then we find out what will be live, and we discover that X is live here. Everything else is dead because X is being read in this particular assignment. Now, when we go to this program point, we find that we have X live from here and X live from here, and therefore, so we have the liveness of X coming in from here, we have the liveness of X coming in from here, and therefore we say that X is live here. As we go further, X is live. As we go further, X is still live. Okay, so this is the liveness information that we have computed. Okay, we have to make sure that this information is consistent. Okay, in particular, what does liveness mean? Liveness means that a variable is marked as live if there exists a control flow path along which the value of the variable is used. So we observe here that we have here X is dead, but there is a control flow path here along which this X is being used. So this is not a consistent information. We have to somehow say that there is a path from this point onwards after which X is used. It so turns out that this path is a path in a loop, and we had not visited this node before. So we visited this node before visiting this node, so we didn't have this information. Once we get this information, we need to adjust the information here, and we need to say that X is live. So we need to iterate over the program. We need to traverse the program once again and find out if the values change anywhere else. And we observe that here in the second iteration, this is the only place where the value changes. Now, if we were to compute it any number of times, the values will not change any further. So this is how we perform live variable analysis. Okay. We will see more formally how this is achieved. This is just an informal introduction.